Hello, welcome once again to Android Developer Office Hours. I'm Joe Mallon, the moderator, and to my right I have Alex Lucas, Trevor Johns, Joe Fernandez, and Roman Nurek. Our producers today are Redo Meyer and Robert Lee. We'll start with our first question in moderator. The question is, what is a base context? How does it differ from an activity context or the application context? When should I use it?
Okay. I can actually take this one. So there's a class in the framework called context wrapper that you can pass a context, and what that lets you do is access certain methods of one context from a different one. So that the context wrappers method, get base context, basically lets you just access the data for another context. So as opposed to get application context or just to get context call, which would get the current context that you're actively in.
Anyone have anything to add? All right.
I think that's a pretty good answer.
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks.
Let's move on to the next question. The gallery widget hasn't gotten much love in many releases. I also noticed the gallery app doesn't even use the gallery widget. If not using the gallery widget, what's the recommended way to display a gallery of photos?
All right. Well, I mean, you can still use the gallery widget, of course. Alternatively, you could use a grid view, but I mean, really, what this is going to boil down to, though, is it's up to you how you want to display photos. We don't have, as you mentioned, we don't have a way to go and actually give you the same view used in the gallery widget, the gallery app. So if you are writing an app that displays photos, you're going to have to either use the gallery widget or roll your own. Roman, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Just one more thing, I guess. So you mentioned grid view, and that's perfectly fine. But there are a couple of issues with grid view, basically around spacing and having full pixel level control over everything. So one alternative is if you are trying to get something pixel perfect, you could try a list view, and basically you just have a list view that for every single row, instead of displaying one item from an adapter, you'd have to kind of create your own adapter and display maybe a couple of items, like 2 or 3 items, whatever you want. I think that's how some of our system apps do things, but I'm not 100% sure. But that's kind of another way to do things if you want pixel level control.
Thank you, gentlemen. Next question. What was the thought process behind not showing the overflow icon in an action bar when the device has a menu button? This causes confusion, as the user will see maybe 2 actions but have no idea that there are more.
All right. Well, so think of the case where a user is upgrading their phone from, say, Froyo or Gingerbread to Ice Cream Sandwich. Right? They already have a phone with a menu button. They expect that menu button to continue to work the way it's been using before they upgraded. So for that reason, we can't disable the menu button. Pressing it still has to go and pop up your overflow menu. Now, then the question is, do we provide 2 ways to access that menu or 1? And that's debatable, but I think the logic here was if we actually have 2 ways to get into the exact same menu, it's rather confusing. On top of that, if I remember correctly, when you do open the overflow menu from the menu button, it pops up from the bottom of the screen like it did on older releases. That's right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, trying to maintain the same behavior going forward. So if you press the overflow button and it popped up a screen on the bottom, that would be really confusing. So I think that's sort of the logic there.
There's only one other thing I would add is that the action bar, before we even had this kind of concept of an on-screen, on-screen buttons, like physical buttons, or on-screen hard buttons, or whatever we want to call them.
Soft buttons.
Soft buttons. There you go. So before we even had the concept of this overflow, in Gingerbread and Froyo and before that, we still had the action bar. And our recommendation back then was basically put your primary actions on screen and have overflow actions under the menu. And there was no other on-screen affordance for popping up that menu. So it's kind of in line. The current behavior is in line with our previous recommendations. And it's kind of like you said, as a user goes from a Froyo or Gingerbread device to an ICS device with a hard menu button, they still see the same kind of behavior. They don't see this kind of new random thing that's popped up out of nowhere.
Right. It's called an overflow menu for a reason, right? I mean, you use it when you run out of room, but you still want to have most of your actions on screen.
Thank you. The next question. I'm new to fragments. From a performance point of view, Does it make sense to use a fragment on each page of a view pager or viewed page indicator, especially if every fragment page will host a list view, and given that the user can add many pages? Thanks.
So I guess the answer here is it depends on how your application is structured. There's no harm in using a fragment. I mean, of course, there is a small cost when you do use them, but on the grand scheme of things, it's not that big of a deal. If you have a reason to use fragments, by all means use them. If you don't think you're ever going to go and display that content somewhere else, you don't have to use a fragment. It's really up to you and just whatever makes the most sense for your code. I wouldn't be too concerned about performance one way or the other in this case.
Okay, thank you. For the next post, we actually had an answer. Do you want me to go ahead and read it anyway?
What's the next post?
Sure.
Resource IDs?
Oh, sure, why not?
Yeah.
Okay. I will read the question and the response that we got from someone else on Moderator. Resource IDs are generated by AAPT tools when the app is compiled. Are these IDs immutable, guaranteed to be the same from one compilation to another, and in future Android releases? Thanks. The response was they are not always the same from one compilation to another. Simply adding another @ plus ID above an existing one in a layout file, for example, can cause the values to change. Occasionally, you'll need to do a clean build to solve a mismatch if things get out of sync if you're using Eclipse. Any other comments people want to make?
But before we move on, the sort of subtext of the question is like, is this a solution to my problem? And we just told them no. So if you're actually in the Hangout, I'd actually like to hear what you're trying to accomplish, that you wanted to sort of use hard-coded resource IDs, and maybe we can give you an alternative approach.
Right, but yeah. The answer given by on Moderator is absolutely correct, though. Resource IDs do change. They can change anytime you change anything in your app. So yeah, like Alex said, let us know what you're doing. Maybe we can give you a better answer. It's not common to try and reuse resource or to hard code resource IDs. So it sounds like you're doing something a little odd there.
Okay. We're next going to go to someone who's actually in the Hangout, Mark. So go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I have a question about the preferences. I'm using preferences, the honeycomb flavor, the preferences fragments. And specifically, I'm trying to reset all the values to their default settings. So what I've done is I've registered a preference that fires an intent, which starts a reset my preferences activity. I get a hold of the preference manager and the editor. I clean everything, I commit, and then it launches the main activity of the application again, just like as if the user had launched it for the first time. All of this works fine. The problem is if the user immediately goes back to the preferences, he sees the old values before they were wiped, and that is because onCreate isn't called, and I assume that the onResume just doesn't know that all the values in the database have changed from underneath of it. I tried to remove the code to onResume. The problem with that is that every time you go back now, it literally adds more resources, and you end up with the same set of preferences. You know, the first time in once, the next time in you have them doubled, the next time in you have 3 of them. So what is the best way to reset all the preferences and have the preferences view reflect that everything is set to default again?
Roman, you look like you have a good answer.
I don't know if I have a great answer. I do have one question though. So you said that so the reset preferences item is a preference itself?
Yeah, it's a preference that fires an intent,
and the
which
intent
launches
fires
my own activity to do the work, because there's more than just resetting the preferences themselves. We also have, license keys on our servers that need to be unhinged, because otherwise they're going to chew up a seat. So there's heavy processing. So all that happens in async tasks within my own activity.
Okay, and is the separate activity, is that kind of like the home activity that has a special mode in which it's resetting things, or is it basically like a dialogue that shows a spinner or something and
Correct. So what happens is you click on the preference, the deactivate or reset preference, whatever its name is, it fires the intent, which launches the activity. Immediately, the activity shows a dialog saying, "Oh, are you really sure that you want to reset? Yes or no?" If you say yes, then the dialog goes away, and we show a indeterminate progress bar for as long as we do all the things on the network. And then once that is done, that activity finishes and launches the main activity of the app.
So so you basically you go from the preferences to the resetter, and then from there you jump straight back into the home activity?
Correct.
Okay, so what you should do, it seems like you should actually destroy the preferences activity off the stack. You should basically clear it. So what you could potentially do is just reset the task. I don't remember all the intent flags that you need, but you basically reset the tasks that you kill or finish the preferences activity so that it's basically no longer needed. That's my kind of naive guess at how you would approach this without looking at preferences fragment in detail.
Yeah, that's what
So
I
the-
recommend as well.
So the intent is only defined in the XML. So you're saying there is some sort of intent flag that I can set that destroys the calling activity?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I
Yeah.
think it's clear top.
Yeah, so clear, you can look at flag, okay, so under the intent class, look at flag activity clear top. That'll basically say, like, if on your current task, and your current task includes the home activity and the preferences activity and then your resetter, whatever it's called, if the activity that was to be started is already on the task, then don't create a new one. Simply wipe everything on top of it, including the preference activity and your resetter, and jump back to it. That's a very kind of simplistic way of explaining it, but basically using intent flags in your, if you call it intent.setFlags or add flags,
Right.
using that you can control basically the history or the back stack that you for your task. So that's probably the way to do it.
Okay, and that flag needs to go onto the call that's coming from the preferences, correct?
Right. So well, it's
No, it would actually be the call from
the resetter.
from your reset activity. When you go back to the main activity, the intent you fire there, you'll set it as the flag there. So once your main activity comes up, you'll clear everything out.
Automatically took out all of these
Right.
and went.
Okay.
inserted
So
them.
basically, when you call start activity on your home intent or your go back home intent,
So-
that go back home intent should have the flags to clear at your task.
Okay, great. I'll give that a try. Thanks.
Thank you.
You know what I'd really love to see is an animated guide to all these flags.
Oh my god, that would be amazing. That would
Right.
be so good. Some sort of like a walkthrough that talks about because those are actually some of the most kind of complicated parts of Android development, figuring out what all the different
Yeah, they're not that
intent flags
hard,
do.
but trying to visualize it from this block of text in the documentation is a little tough for somebody who's more, it's very much a visual thing, right? You have these stack of activities and you're going and swapping them around and manipulating them. I think it would lend itself really well to an actual animated guide.
Absolutely, maybe even an
Thank you for
interactive one.
volunteering, Trevor.
Yes.
What have I done?
Sure, we'll have that ready by tomorrow.
Right.
No.
Yes. All right.
Well,
Let's.
maybe somebody out there watching will do it for us.
Okay.
Go
So somebody who actually has more graphics design skills than I have. You'll get like the little MS Paint version with squiggly lines and.
I would link to it. I would
Let's
sing a
move.
person's praises.
Let's move on to the next question in moderator. Having some generic fragments that display DB data based on some provided metadata, is it advisable to use one generic activity that displays the proper fragment based on intent data, or is it better to have an activity for each case? And an answer has been proposed here. That's going to depend on your needs. If they all interact with their host activity in a similar fashion, it makes sense to use one activity so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If they all have specific purposes and aren't related, then a different activity implementation might make sense. If it's a mix, you could have an abstract activity class that holds all the common methods and then make a new activity extending the base activity that has your specific needs for the fragment.
One thing that I'll add to this is that this question really closely parallels the earlier days of like dynamic web programming, where people figured out that they could have one web address like mydomain.com and make any content appear up there that they wanted just by having the backend assemble the HTML and get all sorts of different content at one URL. But the immediate downside was that you couldn't bookmark anything because everything was at the same URL. So the Android equivalent here is that there's sort of a problem where you can't intent directly to different sets of fragments. You can only intent to activities. So if you want to have the ability for other applications to intent into specific parts of your application, then you should probably have a couple different activities. If you don't actually care about that stuff, then you can get away with having it all in the same fragment, if that makes the coding easier.
Thank you, Alex. I heard some talking in the background. Be sure that if you're not interacting with us to mute your microphone. It's definitely okay for you to be in here, visually and on audio, but make sure you do a mute so we're not picking up background noise. Thank you. Does anybody else besides Alex have anything to comment about this question? Okay, great. Next question out of moderator. Xamarin ported Android source to C#, and they're reporting a huge performance boost. Does that mean that the Dalvik VM is inefficient? Can I get even better performance than using the NDK? And then there's a link.
Yeah, I don't think we can say much on the Dalvik side. You'd want to get somebody from the Dalvik team in here. That said, as far as the question about the NDK, now of course, whenever you write native code, there's the potential to have close to whatever your maximum performance is for the hardware, right? Because you're interacting directly with the CPU. That said, there's a number of drawbacks with using the NDK. First off, I actually have seen some cases where garbage collected code actually does run faster than native code, just because it's possible to mess up your memory management. Not always, but sometimes. But more importantly, you're going to lose the cross-platform capabilities that you get when you write your code using Java language and then compile down into an APK that way. If you write native code, it's going to be targeted towards one architecture, or however many architectures you set when you build it. And if you haven't built for an architecture, your app won't run there. So that's a pretty big downside to native code. The other thing to note too is you don't have access to all the capabilities of the system at that level. So then you wind up having to do things like write JNI bridges, and whenever you go through JNI, you're going to lose performance that way too. So because of that, depending on the nature of your application, it could actually wind up quite a bit slower. So the short answer here is it really depends on what you're writing. Usually NDK is a good choice whenever you're porting over a lot of really complicated code from another platform, usually games. So if you have a cross-platform game that's written in OpenGL, mostly interacting with the OpenGL libraries, then the NDK might be a good choice. And game developers are the ones who usually need to go and squeeze out every last drop of performance. But for most apps, I'd say don't bother. It's just going to give you headaches.
Any other comments? Thank you, Trevor. We have a question in from the Hangout that I'll go to first, and then we need to move backwards in the moderator for a question I skipped. So first from the Hangout, how can I change the theme dynamically to my custom theme each time the user starts the app?
So basically, how can you change the theme dynamically? This is definitely possible. I think you have to do it in your in your activity, right before calling super.onCreate or set content view. I forgot which one it is, but basically, I think I forgot the exact call, but there's a way to do it.
I think
There is set theme.
Yeah. Now, what would actually be a good example is Honeycomb Gallery.
Yes.
So we have a sample that we wrote for Honeycomb that goes and displays a very basic photo gallery. And in the menu, there's an option to go and pick which theme you want. So we've already implemented probably exactly what you're trying to do. So take a look in the samples directory. Again, it's called Honeycomb Gallery. If you can find that, just take a look at how it does it. It's actually pretty straightforward, and just copy that code. Alex here wrote that, I think, actually.
Yeah, I did. It is pretty straightforward. The one thing you have to remember is if the application is already fully started up and gone through the onCreate and then you change the theme, you have to restart the activity. So there's no way around that. But if you have like in a preference or something which theme you want to start when the activity starts up, then you just have to make sure to call set theme before set content view, I want to say, and then it should be clear.
So is it for the activity or the entire application?
From the activity.
Because I want the application.
No,
Activity.
Yeah.
Oh, I want it
Theme
for the
starts at
entire
activity
application because I'm providing users to where to set the theme, and I want my application theme to change throughout instead of me having to use set theme in each activity.
You'll have to do it for each now. You do have to call this in each activity. You
Okay.
can have a shared preferences file that's shared between all your activities, and you can
Yeah.
go and send a message to all of them saying, my theme has changed. Please update and relaunch.
Okay.
But again, the themes are actually set at per activity level, so the code to actually go and set this does need to be done on a per activity basis. Users don't
thank
have
you.
to see that, but as a programmer, you do have to deal with that reality.
And
Okay,
just to add
thank
on to that, a good practice is if you have to do this everywhere, you can minimize or maximize code reuse by basically having a base activity that extends from fragment activity or whatever other activity, and in there you have that code in your onCreate. And if you have to extend from like list activity or map activity or something in the future, you could potentially have like a helper that has this functionality. So I mean, there are definitely ways, just like standard programming, like I guess there are good design patterns around this, but yeah, you have to do it for activity.
Thank you.
You're
Sure.
welcome. Thank you. To go back here, we have a question from moderator. Last week, my question was answered advising me not to use the graphic UI editor because of bugs, which made me think, how's the workflow like with a UI designer on the team? I assume that means our team. Should I just ask the designer to draw the UI, then reproduce it on XML?
I think that's actually referring to their team. So if they have
Okay.
if they have a UI designer, right, who's not a programmer,
I see.
how should they go and
Right.
should they go and use the UI designer in Eclipse and then do that, or should they just do everything in Photoshop and have a developer go and do everything? And I think that depends on the skills of your UI designer too, but I think generally speaking, when you're designing UIs, I find it's good to go and do it in something like Photoshop, get some really well-defined mocks of what you want it to look like, and then hand it off to a programmer to actually go and implement those. Whether or not you then go and use the UI editor, or you use you just write the XML by hand, whatever works in that case. As we did mention last week, I think I was the one who said this. There are limitations to what you can pull off with the UI designer in Eclipse. But yeah, I mean, the problem is when you're working inside of these WYSIWYG UI editors, you tend to become constrained by what they give you, right? You're only going to stick to the standard widgets. But a lot of times it makes sense to go and define custom widgets, to go and have all these nice bitmaps to give your app that extra bit of polish. And if you're designing everything inside of Eclipse, it takes a lot more work than it would to just go and throw that together in Photoshop. Roman, do you have anything to add here as our resident UI expert?
Sure, I totally agree with what you're saying. The other thing to note is that there's really like 4 or 5 different, I guess, concrete processes in doing UI design. There's first the interaction design, at which point you kind of create wireframes in like OmniGraffle or just on paper. Then there's the actual visual design, which is really just in Photoshop or Fireworks or whatever. And then there's the asset production phase, where basically you take your Photoshop mocks and you create your icons, you create your buttons or custom widgets if you have them, and then you spit out MDPI, HDPI, XHDPI versions. And then after that, you take all that and you take your visual design and all your interaction stuff, and then you do the front end engineering, which is basically creating your layout XML, populating your image views, your image buttons with the drawables that your designers give you, and so there's a number of different processes. And so I think the question about who does what in the team, that's really up to your team, right? If you have somebody if you have the luxury of having an interaction designer and a visual designer, and then there's like an asset production person, and then yourself, then that's ideal. But dealing out the different tasks to different people is definitely something that's common practice.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. We have another question from the Hangout. I need to implement in my app a way for the app to remember after the user logs in once, so that he doesn't have to log in again. He found 2 options, account manager and shared preferences. Wants to know or ask which one is better and where I can find an example that implements this.
Okay, that's actually a really good question, because both are valid approaches, and it depends on what you want to do. Now, I think account manager really shines when you want to go and export your account credentials to other apps. So take, for example, your Google account on the phone. Any app can go and use Account Manager to go and get a handle to your Google account and request a client login token that can be used to go and access Google services on your behalf. And that's pretty powerful, right? It allows apps that aren't your app to read from your data and do so without having to ask for a username and password. On the other hand, every time you add an account, right, that's going to take up more space in Account Manager, and maybe users don't want to see every app on their system in that list. On top of that, too, it is extra work to go and add things into Account Manager. So if your app is literally just storing a basic username and password for your app, not going to be used anywhere else, shared preferences is fine for that. Of course, make sure to set the permissions on the file so that it is private. You don't want other apps reading that. Also, I believe if I remember right, there was a question last week where somebody was asking what the best practice is for storing a password. And I would strongly recommend storing the plain text password in, actually, honestly, anywhere on the device, right? You should go and talk to your server and exchange that for a authentication token. So that if something does happen and your credentials do get compromised, you haven't just leaked the user's password, which could be used on any number of other sites, right? Losing losing any authentication credential is bad, but losing a user's plain text password is extremely bad. But yeah, I mean, really, it's up to you. It's a UI decision, and it depends on what the use case for your app is. Both are valid.
The problem I heard with shared preferences, though, is the problem with rooted devices. That could be a bit of a problem.
Sorry, what was the question?
With the problem with shared preferences is that when you have a rooted device.
So, if you have a rooted device, there's bigger problems. Honestly, if you stored an account manager and the device is rooted, I'm still not sure that you have 100% security there. I do know there are a couple areas on Android that are slightly more hardened than others. I believe the certificate manager is one of them. I don't think Account Manager, though, has access to hardware credential storage. So if the device is rooted, your credentials in Account Manager are just as vulnerable. It's the same reason why every time somebody asks me if I recommend rooting a device, I usually recommend against it, because it really does defeat Android's security model.
Okay, so it doesn't matter if it's rooted, if the devices will be both vulnerable on Account Manager and shared preferences.
That's correct. In fact, Account Manager might even be a better target, because somebody who's trying to attack the phone knows that Account Manager is full of passwords, whereas shared preferences may or may not have passwords, and they can be stored in different formats, whereas Account Manager is a little bit more standardized. Either way, I think if the device is rooted, either one is just as valid.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question out of moderator. Capturing a video in portrait mode via media recorder still records the video in landscape, even with the preview surface being rotated to show in portrait. Is there a way within the Android SDK to have the video being saved to also be in portrait?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. So the answer is yes. In fact, we looked this up over before the show. There's a couple different ways you can do this. On the camera object, you can do set display orientation, and that should set the orientation that it's recording video in. There's also there's two different ways to do this. There's a camera parameters object. You can set rotation in that object when you set it into your camera before you start using it. So it's two different ways to do the same thing, and that should solve your problem.
Okay.
Cool. All right.
Great. Thank you very much, Joe. We have another. I'd like to interrupt and remind people that if you've joined us, please +1 us so that we get an idea of who's coming into the Hangout. I've been told that I no longer need to do that. All right.
Well, you should still +1 us.
You still +1 us.
But +1
We
us
like
because you like
stunning.
us.
Yes.
Yes, we do appreciate it, even though it's not
But
necessary.
I'm the moderator. They never tell me anything. So let's go on to the next question in moderator. Why isn't MediaRecorder.AudioSource.VoiceCall implemented, or specifically MediaRecorder.AudioSource.Voice downlink. I would like to write an app that records a phone conversation, but the receiving voice is never recorded.
So if I remember correctly, the reason for this is actually a hardware limitation. The telephony stack on Android is actually handled by a separate piece of hardware, and there just literally is not a path from that chip to whatever handles audio recording on the device. It's been a while since I last looked into this, so it's entirely possible that things have changed slightly, but historically that's been our answer. Now, I mean, I will put a plug in here for Google Voice. If you do want to record a call, Google Voice does implement recording, but it does that through things outside of the device. Now, if you really do want to do this, you could also use other services like Twilio and go and route your call through them and have them implement recording on your behalf as well too. Now that doesn't if you're handling incoming calls, they'd have to dial into your Twilio, and if you're doing outgoing calls, you'd have to do the same trick Google Voice does, which is to intercept the call and reroute it. So it's extra work, but it is possible. But it's just not possible on Android devices themselves, mostly for hardware reasons.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add it on. I think we had a similar question like this, or I remember a question like this last week. I had looked into this a little bit, and I've seen some apps that actually claim that they record your phone conversation, but I believe what they're doing actually is taking input from the microphone that's on the phone and trying to record it.
Call up and then try and just capture the audio through ambient noise, and you get a really poor quality recording.
Yeah, so this has been a limitation for a long time. I've remembered several years ago looking into this, and this is not. Right now, I believe it's a hardware problem. It's not something that we can intercept and record. So,
right. I mean, there's also security considerations too. If you have an app on your phone that is written by a rogue developer and they start recording calls without you knowing it, that could be pretty bad. This is one of those things that needs to be approached really carefully. I'll also add, if you are implementing this, I can't give legal advice because I'm not a lawyer, but there are various regulations in a lot of states about various sounds, tones that you have to play when you record calls to make sure the other person is aware you're doing it. It does vary depending on where in the world you are, but it is something you want to look into.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll move on in moderator.
Actually, I think we have one waiting on the Hangout.
We do? Do we?
Paul Blundell.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead, Paul. Hello? Do we have somebody waiting? No.
no.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. I see something that's written there, but I cannot see.
I'll read it for you.
Oh, in the
Okay,
chat.
thank you.
Paul Bundle says permission _ heavy
No,
heavy
not a question.
breathing.
Was commenting on that. All right.
Thought that'd
Permission
be in the
heavy breathing.
pipeline.
Yeah,
Not a question.
Yeah. That's, yeah. Although that is
The
a time machine
comedians in the
question, I
hangout
doubt
today.
that we're
Awesome.
going to do that anytime soon. Next moderator question will be: when will it be possible to package library projects as bundled jars instead of its raw source form as it is the case today?
I believe you actually can do that. So it depends on what you're trying to do. If you just want to go and take just plain source code, you can bundle that up in a jar and include that in your libs directory, and that'll work just fine. What library projects get you is access to the resources folder. So there was that question about resource IDs earlier. And that's really where library bundle or library projects tend to shine, right? It makes sure all the different libraries can go and share their resources and assets amongst one another. And if you are doing that, I don't think there's any real way you could actually go and bundle that up easily inside of a jar. Let me think for a second there. Yeah, you couldn't do it directly because the problem is all of your asset IDs need to match. Now, if you want to get creative, you could probably find some way to go and include your assets inside of that jar and extract them manually and then load them in. But that's a lot of work. But if you're not using assets, feel free to just go and put things in a jar right now. It'll work fine. There's a number of libraries that already distribute that way. Google Maps, I believe, is distributed as a jar file, isn't it?
It's
Google Maps is a little different, I
Yeah.
think, because it uses bits on the device itself.
Oh, no, Analytics. That's what I'm thinking of.
Analytics
Analytics is
is-
distributed as a jar.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So I mean, it depends on what you're doing, but if it's just code, you can do it just fine as a jar file.
Okay.
And if not, it's a very complicated question. Time machine, we can't tell you when or if, but I will
did
say
this
it's
one last
complicated.
week.
So I wouldn't hold your
Did-
breath.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. We have a question pending in the Hangout. Davey Doyle. Go ahead.
Welcome back, Davey.
Thanks. It's basically a UI design question type of thing. I'm developing an app which will target both Android and iOS, where I have started a prototype on iOS, and now I would like to convert it into like an Android kind of style. Now, within iOS, I don't know if you are aware of this, there's this grouped table view component that you can use.
Yeah.
I can show it to you. Looks something like this. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
can
it's-
see it. The bottom of your
basi-
phone's cropped off, but yeah. So which part of the UI is that? Just to be clear.
It's basically the three sections on the page that's referred to as a grouped table view.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. So in Android, there's no real out-of-the-box component which allows you to group certain layout components into a separate zone.
Okay, so and actually, just to go in and relate this with something which people who aren't familiar with iOS would be more familiar with. This is sort of like a what's it called? An HTML form set.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in
Yeah, something like
Windows
that, yeah.
development or something, it's also just like a field or a group something. It's a group control. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
grouping things. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. What would be the best way to kind of partition an Android screen in that type of way, where you have like three zones on a certain layout? Is there like a standard Android way to do that?
So the first question I'd ask is, do each of these zones have titles, or are they completely not something that you can provide useful titles for?
Not really useful titles, no.
Okay. So let me answer the question. Had you said yes, there are titles. I'll get back to
For the
second, but-
benefit of our viewers.
Yeah,
right?
for the
Right.
benefit of other folks. Basically, the one way in which you could do that is to have a list view, use a list view, and potentially use a list view if it's dynamic length of content, and then use list separators. And for list separators, the list separators would basically indicate the beginning of a new section. And for that, there's actually a built-in style in the framework. I think it's called list separator text view style, and it's an attribute. So it's android.r.attr.list separator text view style. So that's and you can use similar kind of visual styling if you're not even using list view. If you're just using kind of like if you're on a tablet, let's say, and you have 3 or 4 panes of content, and you want to indicate what is what.
Yeah,
So you
so
can-
and I think a good example of that would be like in the contacts app, we put a heading for each letter, like the A contacts,
Right.
the B
Exactly.
contacts.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's if you do have titles. If you don't have titles, there's no. I wouldn't say that there's an exact kind of perfect way to do this, or a perfect kind of recommendation. It's really up to you. But I will say at a high level that the design of Ice Cream Sandwich, I guess from Honeycomb and later, this kind of holographic UI. Some of the core principles are around typography and spacing, and minimizing line. So partly there's no kind of easy answer to this, but you can probably achieve what you're trying to do using spacing. Basically, increasing the spacing between 2 of your zones or 3 of your zones to indicate that these are actually grouped controls.
Or
So
the
that-
other thing you can do too, if you can't do spacing, is actually make them just visually different, right? So if you can like put a picture behind one, if that makes sense in your app, right? Things to actually make them just visually distinct from each other, and create a grouping that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's no basically to simplify the answer here. There's no easy answer, but I would look to some of the built-in apps like the People app to see how you can do that. And yeah, that's probably the best we can say on that.
Yeah,
Because I was kind of looking at two approaches.
Mhm.
One was the list view with the section dividers. I think there's like a screenshot on the Android design page.
Right.
I've posted the link, and that looks like really good on Ice Cream Sandwich, so I think I can do something with that. Because even on iOS, it's basically a list view without titles. I mean, I can put titles on there on the Android version. That's not really an issue. So that was one option. And another option I was looking at is that there's like this third-party library that simulates the iOS stable view on Android.
Right. So
But-
I would advise against doing that. I
Exactly,
think
yeah.
Roman was about to say the same thing. That's why I'm about to talk. But yeah, every time I see an app do that, because I have seen a number of apps do exactly that.
Yeah.
And it's really obvious that it's not an Android app. It stands out. It looks wrong. Nothing against that particular UI paradigm, but it's out of place on Android, right? It's not what
Exactly.
users have come to expect.
Yeah,
Right.
and in particular, the kind of the heavily rounded corners. Anytime you see heavily rounded corners on Android, it just feels kind of out of place.
Yeah.
Even with Gingerbread, we really toned down the corner rounding and things like that to make it seem a little more specific to to Android. That wasn't the only reason.
I've already decided to go with the list view approach. And like I said, it looks pretty good on Ice Cream Sandwich, but I'm a bit worried that it will not look all that great on like pre-Honeycomb devices.
That's entirely
Like the
possible.
primary
I
market
never did
of
like the
this
way those
app.
list views looked before Honeycomb, because if I remember right, it just draws a gray bar across.
Yeah, it's basically a gray bar with white text on top with probably a shadow.
Yeah.
Now,
Also for like company branding, that's not really acceptable. I mean, it has to have an Android look and feel, but there needs to be some kind of company branding, so it needs to look good as well.
all right, so
So is it possible to style the list view across different Android versions so that it looks the same? And is
yeah,
that
you can totally do that. It
acceptable? Yeah.
takes a bit more work, but you can customize the way the list view works. And that's actually what I was about to recommend, is take a look and see if you can go and either port some of the elements of the Holo theme pertaining to list view back, or create an entirely custom theme that gets you the view you're looking for.
Yeah, and in
Because I
general,
have
I'd
had
say
some
don't-
remarks from people that said, don't try to port over the Holo theme to older Android devices because then it might look out of place
It
there.
might.
There's certainly parts of the Holo theme that may feel out of place. For example, like I'd say like text view styling. So an edit text box that lets you edit text on ICS and Honeycomb. That's a very, very distinct style. And it's probably okay, to take that style and bring it to Gingerbread or for other devices. People will still get it. People will still understand. It may look a little different, but people will still understand it. It will still make sense.
Yeah, it's a question between using an iOS look and feel and
absolutely.
using a Holo look and feel on a pre-Holo device. I'd go with the Holo option.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, but the thing is, like for things like the list separator text view style in Honeycomb and ICS, it's almost a universal looking widget. It's not something that's gonna really confuse anybody. I mean, obviously, you have to make sure that it meshes well with the rest of the app. You can't. I mean, you shouldn't just take it wholesale and apply it without without tweaking it to make to fit within the rest of the design. But definitely, it's something that is universally understood. Kind of a piece of text with a line underneath and then some controls below it. It's almost universally understood as a header.
All right. Well, though in this case there wouldn't be text because there's no title.
Right, and even if it's just lines, separating things, that's fine. As long as it looks good with the rest of the design, it should be fine.
Yeah.
And I
So,
don't
like
need
I
to
said,
take,
it doesn't
there's
necessarily
nothing
have to be.
which will only work
sorry.
on ICS or Honeycomb.
Sorry, say that again. I didn't catch you talking there.
That type of stuff works also like on Android 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. There's nothing like ICS or Honeycomb specific within that whole list view section divider thing.
At least, I don't think within that there should be. I mean, it's just a colored bar. There's nothing really complicated about what it's trying to do there. I know there are some other parts of Holo, like say action bars, that are a bit more difficult to port, but
Yeah.
list headings should be pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I think we should move on at this point. The next question I think we should go to is this question here. What is a good way to implement cross-APK class loading in plugin architecture on Android? See the Stack Overflow question.
Okay. We took a look at this question before the show, and so the person's trying to go and do dynamic class loading to pull in a DEX file from another APK, which in theory should be entirely possible provided that the apps are signed with the same signature. That's a prerequisite to go and pull resources out of another APK. Unfortunately, they're running into some, their approach seems sound, but they're running into some technical issues that's preventing them from doing it. There is somebody here who, a couple doors down that has done this sort of thing before. Unfortunately, I couldn't find them before the show to actually ask them for more details. So I don't have a good answer for you off the top of my head, given that this isn't a very common thing to do. I will say that your general approach is correct, right? I mean, if you want to do a plugin, make another APK, make sure they're signed with the same signature, and then you can try and pull in classes from that other APK using dynamic class loading.
Right.
Now, you might, if I remember right, you might have to actually take the class and write it out to temporary storage first. And I don't know if they were trying to do that or not. If not, that could be the problem, because I don't think the class loader can actually reach into the other APK directly. So, and I do remember this is a problem we've had before trying to do some dynamic class loading stuff, is that things do wind up getting written to temporary storage. For what you're doing, that's not a problem. So I think that might be the missing step. With that, if you're on the air, I'd love to ask you more questions about the approach you're taking. But yeah, generally speaking, take your class, write it out to some temporary folder, and then use the dynamic class loader on that.
Right. We do have a link to it in Stack Overflow, so we can get your expert to post a response to the Stack Overflow question.
Yes, absolutely. That's
Okay.
a good idea.
All right, let's move on now. There's a question in the Hangout. Should games also aim for the holo design, or is that only for non-game apps?
It's down there.
I think it depends on your game. If it's we see a lot of full screen, usually NDK powered games. For like to use the sort of popular example, like Angry Birds or something like that, where they have their own themes like across the entire game. They have their own custom UI in every single element of it. If you have a full screen game, generally that's the way you want to go. If it's a Java based game that uses the standard Android UI components, and you're going to make it feel like an Android app in that way, then I would say.
Well, I'd say like the language you write it in actually doesn't really have any bearing. Whether or not it's a native app or if it's written in the Java language. I think the bigger question is what your gameplay experience is like.
Right.
Games usually try and have this whole immersive experience. They're trying to draw you into the game and make the rest of the world disappear. Which is why usually we see game developers go and do things like implement custom buttons that use whatever visual style the game is defined, right? It's trying to make it feel like you just have the game there. And I think that's actually usually the right approach. It gives you just a better gameplay experience. We do game reviews every Friday, and one of the things I've seen game developers dinged for multiple times is actually they, in a game this has this whole immersive experience, they'll go and pop up a dialogue that uses the Android standard controls, and it's taking you out of that experience. And it does detract from the experience. So, I certainly want to encourage people to use holo whenever it makes sense. Games sort of always exist in this special world of their own, and a lot of the rules get bent specifically for games just because it's they're trying to be fun, right?
I would say that also, I think it mostly depends on what sort of game experience you're aiming for. I have some puzzle games and card games, and those really are not expected to have an immersive experience.
Right.
Well, even in a card game, you have the dealer's table in front of
you
you,
have
and
yes,
you're trying to pull out the full casino feel.
You don't have to. What I'm saying is, you don't have to have, in those situations, a total UI for one experience versus the other.
That's true.
For a puzzle game, you may have some things that are part of a custom UI, but you may also have some things that are part of the standard UI that you use just because you're not interested in making a totally immersive experience, and you don't think it adds anything in particular to the game.
I think that's fair, yeah.
Right, so for instance, like a Sudoku game or something, you might
Right.
still have an action bar across the top, stuff like that. I guess the important thing is to be consistent. So like what Trevor was saying, if you're in a fully immersive game experience, don't pop up an Android dialogue. But if you are in a more simple thing where you're relying on the Android UI more, then you don't need to go and have, custom buttons inside the UI and then Android buttons sort of outside the UI.
Right. Yeah. Pick one or the other.
Right.
Right. Let's see what we have here.
We skipped a few questions.
Yeah, I did. Let's go back. We had this question here, what's an effective way to cache items from a REST API? Now, I understand that we actually answered that last week. Or did we
No,
discuss
this
it?
would be a new question, because
Okay.
I moved every question out last week, so...
Okay, let's go.
I know this has come
No.
before, so...
What?
For example, in my transit app, yeah, we did cover this one last week.
How did it move back in?
We've had this question before. It's a reasonable thing. Maybe we should just tackle it
Yeah.
quickly. and
Okay,
then
fine.
move
Let's go
on.
for it.
Sorry about that. To repeat, what's an effective way to cache items from REST API and check their freshness? For example, in my transit app, I frequently find myself needing to cache bus routes, bus stop features, and refresh them when they become stale. We got an answer back from someone that said, I recommend storing data in a local SQLite database using a timestamp to identify the last update time. You can then perform a select using timestamp to retrieve any old data which needs to be refreshed. You could also have a background service which removes out-of-date data using a delete with timestamp less than a certain amount. For a tidy solution, wrap the SQL database in a set of providers, retrieve the data in a custom loader or in an app service to keep the retrieval off the UI thread.
Right.
Any other comments?
A comment we've given before on this is use a sync adapter and have a background process which goes and grabs the data, say every 15 minutes, every hour, or if you have, if you want to use C2DM, you could actually go and send a ping to the device, assuming it's a low frequency update. The reason why I recommend this is because whenever you're working with web services, you can't guarantee that the phone will actually have an internet connection, right? The user could be on an airplane, they could be in a tunnel. They still expect their phone to work. And if you have this background sync process which stores everything locally, you can tie, again, like that person was saying, use a SQLite database. You can go and make sure everything is still there. They can still perform write operations. You just queue them up to go and do things later. So things always work, and more importantly, is they're fast. If you're writing to local storage, that's a whole lot faster than trying to communicate over whatever slow edge network connection the user might happen to be on if they're unlucky.
Right.
Yeah.
And sync adapters do take care of a lot of things that you would otherwise have to write yourself. As you said, they won't connect if there's no network available. They do check to see that there's no other synchronization going on at the same time, and they schedule themselves regularly, etc. You can build into them account credentials and stuff like that. There's a sample app called Sample Sync Adapter, which shows you how to do a sync adapter for contacts provider, which is a lot more complicated than most data providers would be. So I suggest that.
I would also add on the topic of checking for freshness. I can't really tell from the question if you have control over the server, if you manage the server side of the REST API or not. If you do, then what you can do instead of having the device pull is to look into C2DM and just have it send a message to the device every time there's more data for that device to collect.
Right.
If you are not in charge of if you're accessing someone else's REST API, then look into how often their API or their data set updates. Like if they only have updates available every 30 minutes or so, there's no reason to check every 15.
Yeah, they'll be careful with C2DM, right? Just because there's an update doesn't mean the user wants to waste battery power downloading that update. So a good
Right.
case would be an RSS reader. Ignoring the fact that you don't control the RSS feeds.
Right.
Let's say you have a server that knew every time an RSS post appeared, right?
Right.
If you woke up every time one of those came in, your phone would never go to sleep.
Right.
And on the other hand, the user doesn't necessarily expect absolute freshness. So
Right.
I think in that case, a 30-minute
Right.
refresh or an hour refresh would be fine.
Well, you don't even necessarily just sorry, real quick. You don't necessarily need to go and download every time you get a C2DM. The important thing is if you have received no C2DMs, then you know there's no data,
Right.
and you don't even need to
That's true.
connect to the server.
Yeah.
That's true.
We're getting close to the end, so let's move on here. We've got one last Hangout question from Billy Charlton. Go ahead. Hello?
That's you. Oh, I was just listening. I didn't actually have a question. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay,
Oh,
fine.
fair
All
enough.
right. So, do we have any other questions from anywhere in the Hangout?
Well, I've got a question for a friend of mine, if I can ask.
Sure.
Sure.
He's doing something that has to do with a call app, that he uses the upstream and downstream I heard from him, to listen to the stuff that comes in a phone call, and he wants to manipulate that stream. Can he do that?
So he wants to manipulate the upstream audio for a phone call?
The upstream or downstream, I don't know which one, but...
Okay, well, so downstream ties in with the question we answered earlier, and that's that you actually don't normally have access to downstream phone call audio. Upstream, I believe you have the opportunity to record it for the same reason that you can record from the phone's mic, right? If you have a voice recorder app, of course, we still want to let apps access the mic. That said, I don't think there's any way to go and pipe that audio back into the telephony stack. Again, for the same reason you don't have access to the downstream audio. It's actually a separate processor on the phone, and so there's no way to go and relay your audio there.
Is that for all devices or just for a specific... It depends on the model of the device?
To my knowledge, that's all devices. I think that there's a standard design for how Android devices should be, at least at a high level of how they should be designed, and I think this is normally what it specifies. Don't quote me on that. I'm not on the hardware team, but that was at least my understanding of things.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the Hangout?
Yes.
Okay. What?
There was also, we did skip one more, about a custom view in the action bar.
Right, I'm going to come back to that. Is there a way to map a custom view in the action bar to work as an up button?
A custom view in the... Oh, okay. That's a very good question.
So work as an up button is an interesting question because the app itself is in charge of implementing the up button, right? So if in your on options item selected for Android.r.id.home you say go up or something, you can certainly create another affordance somewhere in your UI that also calls go up.
Right, yeah, so whatever you're rigging that up button to do, you could just make another button that does the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, not that you should do that because really up is up and you should have a single, in general you want a single affordance to do, a single action. But I mean, if you're trying to create something like your own up button, first, I mean, obviously try not to, just use the action bar, but if you need to create your own up button, really all it is creating, showing your app icon, showing that up little left caret, and then calling whatever up.
Yeah, you should keep in mind window flags.
Say again?
Or sorry, your intent flags, right?
Right.
You want to make sure that I can't remember what flags are attached to the up action normally.
So if you're implementing up at all, you should look at the support library. The latest version of support library has a class called navutils, which helps with implementing up. So try not to implement up by yourself. There are a couple of kind of nuances with kind of recreating tasks and things like that. Basically, look at navutils. That'll solve all the intent flag stuff.
Cool. All right, and I think we're actually out of time.
Yeah, I think that's it pretty much.
Cool.
We will see you once again next week. Until then.
Adios, folks.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for joining us.